But darling, you are enough, deserve the world, all its love, as long as you choose it. And darling, you are worthy of all that you seek, the life you desire, as long as you choose it. One last thing, you are complete when you no longer compete and accept who you are, an absolute treat, as long as you choose it. Choose yourself.
What's up, I'm IN-Q. I encourage you guys to watch this episode of Live Through Love. We talk about dating, we talk about creation, we talk about fear and overcoming fear that is irrational so that you can get back to living your lives with empowerment. I hope you tune in.
So we just dive straight in.
All right.
So my first question, and the main question that's going to guide our conversation, is how do you define living through love? And then how are you doing it?
Well, it's interesting. I would almost ask you the question first because what I'm going to say is going to be nebulous. Because my real answer is it's a moment to moment thing. And sometimes I succeed and sometimes I fail. And even within success and failure, there's infinite shades of gray. Mm-hmm. And I can always get better at being more open-hearted, less judgmental, more connected to myself and the world. Mm-hmm. So it's a process rather than a product for me. What would your answer be?
It is a process, for sure. It's a practice.
Yeah.
So the way I define it, it's we inspiring others to look at the world through the lens of love. We operate out of love or we operate out of fear.
Yeah.
You turn on the TV and guess what? There's a buffet of fear just slapping you. So it's like, how many ways can I show people that there is positivity, there is optimism, there is love in the world? And I'm not talking about gummy bears and unicorns and rom-coms. We're talking about people that are actually going out of their way to make themselves better. But it is a self-practice. You know, one example I always give, pretty constant, is if I get cut off on the freeway, my initial gut reaction is like, give him the bird and like, I hope you get a speeding ticket or something. Right. But now it's like, I got to catch myself. And to me, living through love is the opportunity of catching yourself and saying, you know what? You didn't do that to me on purpose. I hope you get there safe, because they could be rushing to job. Right? They might be late.
Right,
sure. They could be rushing to a doctor's. Who knows where they're going? So it is a practice. It is a process. It's constant. And I don't do it every single day, but I try to do it as much as possible.
Yeah. And I think talking about it hopefully inspires other people to try to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I get why this is your platform and why this is what you want to share with the world.
Yeah. Thank you. So you're a wordsmith. You're a poet. I love hearing you speak. I love your voice in general is amazing. It's just something soothing about it. What is the process for you to really put your words together? Where's that coming from?
Well, it just always starts with something that is interesting to me. Something that maybe like stands out throughout my day. And some days there's nothing. And then some days there's like a few things and I'll always just kind of like jot them down. Either they're moments where I'm moved or moments when I'm inspired or moments when I'm angry. And all of them can be transformed into creation because art is alchemy. And what you're basically doing is taking energy and transforming it into a piece of art that you can then share with other people. And then that sharing allows them and you to feel a little bit less alone. So I'm not really like thinking, what would my audience want to hear? I'm just thinking, what am I interested in? And then if I explore that, inevitably somebody wants to hear it or will relate to it.
And I can relate to that because we're all mirrors of each other. There's a lot of times that I'll paint something. It's really a conversation I'm having with myself.
Yeah.
I paint a mural that says, "You are beautiful." I was feeling fat and ugly that day. I needed to hear that. I paint a mural that says, "You belong here." I was telling myself I belong here as an artist.
Yeah, I hear that.
So we have to reinforce ourselves and the vulnerability that comes with that. But the way people take away from it, that's their journey. And I'm amazed at some of the expressions that people have or the DMs I get or what it made them feel, even though that wasn't my initial intention.
Yeah, I mean, people will come up to me after show sometimes and they'll be like, "Man, that one line that you said really hit me and got me thinking about this one thing." And then they repeat the line back to me and it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's the wrong line. Or they interpreted the right line the wrong way. But who am I to say what's right or wrong?
Exactly.
Actually, that's pretentious and obnoxious to confine people to what my meaning of my art even is. If it's really a mirror, then people should see whatever it is that they want to see, and whatever they see is what they're supposed to see. So yeah, I appreciate when people come up and say that they're moved by my work, when it actually is what I intended. And I'm also appreciative when they come up and it's not, because that's their journey.
So as a creator, there's a lot of vulnerability and a lot of surrendering, right? Because we're putting ourselves in this process. We're putting it out there. We're putting our heart out there. And we're like, is it going to land? What are people going to think? Are they going to feel it the way I intended it? And what happens after that?
Is that the question?
I just want to know how you relate to that. It's not so much a question, but it's like, what does that make you think?
I mean, for me, there's like two different areas. There's the creation and then there's the presentation. I tend to be much better at the creation than the presentation. But I'm also really good at separating them, which has been really beneficial to me over my career as an artist, because I never sit there and think what will resonate. And as I'm creating, I never sit there and think, will somebody get this, not get this, be angry, misinterpret it? If somebody misinterprets something for positivity, then it's all good. But if someone misinterprets something that I'm saying and they use it to judge me, that doesn't feel good.
No.
And I deal with that in the presentation of things, but not in the creation of things. I'm the first person in my audience, and I'm really just trying to have a conversation with God. And that might sound cliche or corny, but that's my experience of kind of like dancing with the muse. I don't even think I'm special in that at all. I don't even think it's confined to my genre. It's every genre. Energy flies by, and if you don't grab it and make something with it, it'll go to somebody else. So I just want to keep those channels open as much as I can. And then when I'm creating, I don't want to deal with how this will be received or whether or not it even will. I just want to deal with bringing something to life through me that wants to come into the world. Second part is complicated because my ego comes into play, and I want to be liked, and I want to be validated, and I want to live in abundance and monetize my art without losing my integrity and all of these things. I'll tell you a story, man. One time I was on stage, I was performing, and I saw this guy like looking at his phone, and I just immediately, literally, as I'm performing, I'm like, fuck this guy,
Yeah.
My ego kicks up and I'm like, he's not even listening to me. He doesn't even like me. And then I'm trying to ignore it, but I find my energy like sucked into this person.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I created this whole story about it. Then he comes up to me after the show. He's like, man, sorry I was on my phone. I just kept writing down things you were saying. You know? So in the end, it's just all stories that we tell ourselves about how people are really receiving it anyway. And sometimes somebody won't receive it in the moment, but like it'll plant a seed in their mind that or their heart that maybe will grow into something else later.
Yeah.
So the point is, even though my ego kicks in the second part of it, I try to just keep communicating with that part of myself to let it go so that it can have a new life for someone else in whatever way they want it to be.
It's a beautiful thing. Just releasing it out there and just letting it go on its own. It's like a baby. It's like that's your child that you let it out and let it go, spread its wings and do what it does.
You're able to say that because you have the experience. I am not yet, but yeah, it's like a conceptual artistic baby.
Yeah. And that's the greatest thing. One day, if you decide, when you decide, hardest, most amazing thing I've ever done. That's my greatest creation and my greatest teacher. Yeah. And I'm only 1 year into it.
Right. He's not even really talking back at you yet. Nope. And, you know, telling you things that you never could have imagined and teaching you about life and culture. And, you know, I think, you know, it's the creation that never stops creating. There's nothing else really that, you know, it's the highest form of creation.
It is. And there's a couple lessons that I'm learning from him now, but the biggest takeaway is curiosity. The way he sees everything, then I'm looking at it through the way he's seeing it, and he's just fascinated. A piece of trash is the greatest thing on the planet. To us, we throw things away. Sure. So imagine if we could start taking curiosity and bringing that back into ourselves, into our work, the same way as a child.
Yeah.
That's the lens that I'm really trying to work on things again.
Well, that's what happens when you take shrooms.
Also.
I mean, you just become fascinated with like the simplest of things.
The surrender of these walls of ego and mask and what's this going to look like and perfectionism when you go down some of those journeys. Yeah, those are beautiful.
But I mean, even when you travel and you're in a foreign place and you're outside of your comfort zone, you start to see the world through those curious eyes again. Certainly not in the same extreme, but you start to like discover life rather than just routine, you know, expectations. You know what life is going to be. And first of all, you never really know what life is going to be, but you convince yourself that you do. And because of that, you miss life, right? Everywhere you're vacationing, someone is living. And everywhere that you live, someone is vacationing. Yeah. You know, maybe not the tropical vacation, but still, you know, they're going there for something and they're seeing everything with those new eyes, which is cool. So it's a good reminder.
I mean, we live in LA. You go travel, you tell people you're from LA. They're like, oh my God, you're from LA. I want to be there and go there one day and visit. Yeah. And we forget what we take for granted in the day to day.
Yeah, for sure.
So a lot of your poetry, when I read it, I mean, the title of your book, you have a book, it's called Inquire Within. So is the premise to really check in with yourself and from there continue to go outward? Or explain the premise behind your book?
What is the premise behind my book? What a great question. Well, if I had the book, I could show you the cover.
We can make that happen.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Okay, so here's the cover. And, you know, you have the branches of the tree mirroring the roots. So when you turn it upside down, the roots become the branches. And the branches become the roots. And then when you turn it to the side, it's lungs.
Oh, I've never even saw that before.
Yeah, so the two halves of the book are inhale and exhale. And inhale is kind of like the personal poems about my life and almost like a poetic hero's journey that I'm still on. And then exhale is the social and political stuff. And it's really about change yourself, change the world. But the way that you do that is by going inside first, because a lot of what you see outside is a reflection of what you see inside, because it's what you're choosing consciously or unconsciously to focus on. And then the tagline says, if you change the present, you change the past and the future. And I'll leave that up to other people's interpretations, but I certainly have my own.
Yeah, I could think about it. It's funny because I've read the book. I've heard you on the Audible. I got both.
Cool.
And obviously I've seen you perform, but the long thing, the inhale and the exhale, that just, I saw the tree and I'm like the roots and how it's all connected, but the inhale and the exhale, that's definitely something that did not even cross my mind.
Yeah, it also strangely came out March 2020, which was like when people were, fist fighting in the supermarket for toilet paper.
That's the start of the lockdown.
Yeah, it was the beginning of COVID, which is really about, it's a respiratory disease ultimately. So, yeah.
So the pandemic's also a really good example of living through love. Like when the pandemic first hit, I had just come back from Oakland. I just finished a mural, biggest mural to date. And it says, love me before I'm gone. It's the planet just saying, I'm not going to be here forever. And it was really a message for us to take care of her. And she's asking for help. But we come back and then we're locked down. I lose a bunch of projects, mural gigs, speaking gigs, conference things that I'm designing. And I could have sat in the corner and been, oh, great, this is happening. This is happening to me. And I could have got really angry. But instead I'm like, this is happening to everybody.
Yeah.
This is a human problem. And so many people around me took it like it was a personal attack on them versus looking at it as a human problem. How did you experience going into the lockdown?
Well, I was really lucky. I mean, I was with my not yet wife, but, my best friend in the world, my ride or die human being. And so that made it infinitely better right away. And then I was also privileged enough to continue my career. And I wasn't sure about that at the beginning because a lot of the money that I make and the impact that I have is through live performance. I mean, all of these pieces were really created as like living, breathing documents. They were meant to be experienced and they would change as I changed over the years. So even putting them in a book was a new experience for me and ultimately really gratifying. But then to not be able to perform live for people anymore, I was like, well, how will I make impact and how will I make money, even with the internet? And very quickly, it just kind of like moved over to Zoom. And I found so many other things that were really like fascinating to me in terms of like how I was able to perform in that environment or do workshops in that environment. And my business and impact kept going and actually continued to get better. So I know how lucky of an experience that was. And I also had the means where we were able to go to a really kind of beautiful place in nature for 6 months of the pandemic and get a chance to get out of our then apartment in West Hollywood. And that was extremely lucky. So I say all of that to say I know that my experience wasn't most people's experience globally. I mean, and I'm well aware of that. And then during that period of time, I just tried to do a lot of good personal work and, tried to help where I could in my art and, by giving away to charities or whatever. And yeah.
Doing what you do.
Doing what you do. There's nothing else to do. Yeah.
So you've got a couple of pieces. There are some that are my absolute favorites. And one of them is, I think it's called 85. Because when I proposed to my now wife,
yes,
I painted a mural that said, I want to hold your hand until 80 and say we made it.
Oh, beautiful.
So that has always resonated when I hear you talk about that piece. And in that case, you're talking about outliving your spouse. In my case, I'm talking about the long life we had, and now looking back, now we made it. And I'm really talking into the work it's going to take us to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another piece that you're working on now, similar to that, because you have a fiance and you have your best friend and you have your partner? And how has that affected maybe that piece and some of your other work?
Well, I mean, I'm just really much more settled. It's affected my work, but it's also just more broadly affected my life. Like, I'm much less, I don't know, scattered is the only word that I can really use. Like I felt like I was like looking for something, you know, and I didn't even necessarily know what I was looking for. And that I think showed up in a lot of areas in my life. And now that I have that kind of foundation and that trust, I feel like I can trust the world even more, you know? And so I just feel less scattered, more grounded, more connected. And that certainly shows up in my writing and my performance as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we like to talk about what has led us to certain journeys. And we've talked about in the past with, you know, other relationships and over time is knowing you and getting to know you. But you're saying now you found some grounding. Well, would you say that you knew why you were lost for so long?
Well, what do you mean by that?
So you were just saying I was lost and I was scattered and I wasn't focused. And now you found your life partner. You found your best friend who has grounded you. But do you know what was it that she filled in the gap for you?
I think just being seen and seeing someone is just a huge part of life. And there's a difference between being close to someone and being intimate. Like intimacy is, you know, singular. You know what I mean? Like in the human experience, to truly be intimate with somebody. So I think just having that intimacy at all areas of my life, just like, I think allowed me to settle. I don't know. I mean, it could be age as well.
Could be age. I mean, I'm on the later side of getting married and starting to have a family. I couldn't have done it anytime sooner. I wasn't ready.
Sure.
There was a lot of me that was like, no way, this couldn't be possible. If I had a kid 10 years ago, if I was married 10 years ago, that's a whole nother Ruben. So, but
when we went on our first date, we got back to her place because she invited me over to have tea, which basically I thought meant we were going to hook up.
Yeah.
It wasn't what she had in mind, you know? And so she's like making tea and I literally like go over and I started like kissing her neck. She like let me for like, you know, 5-10 seconds. And then she goes, hey, that feels a bit disconnected from where we are right now. And I was like, damn, okay. And I just stepped back and I was like, you know, totally. And it just like, I don't know, it almost is a microcosm of what I was talking about. I was trying to do something, and in trying to do something, I wasn't present to what was actually happening. So I would say she's taught me how to do that in a lot of areas in my life. And that's been pretty invaluable.
So in that moment, she may have felt your energy was not the physical action of what you were trying to do. You were maybe in the, I'm a man, this is what typically happens.
I was trying to get laid, which is
exactly.
You know, and I don't have any judgment of myself in that moment. I'm just saying, like, my wife and I have talked about this actually, because I never want to be single again. I want to be with this woman for the rest of my life. When I committed, I fully knew what I was doing and I was fully aware. But I think sometimes now I wonder what I would be like if I was single. Not that I want to be single. I don't want to be single at all.
I'm terrified of it.
Forget about it. But I'm just saying, there's this part of me that was chasing after something that wasn't, I don't even think the act of getting laid or having a partner. There was something else that I was trying to maybe fill in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just unaware of it. And so I would say one thing is the intimacy. It has probably filled in a part of me in a real way, you know, a way that I wouldn't like pretend doesn't exist. But there's also all these lessons that I've learned that I think have changed my experience with life. So that was the thought experiment we were talking about the other day. I was like, I wonder what I would, because I think if I went on a date now, I'd be like, hey, how are you? What's going on?
Yeah.
You know, you ever see two people like in love, but they don't even really love each other. They just like love the thought bubble that they've created in between each other.
Yeah.
You know,
going through the motions of what it looks like.
Yeah, they don't, you know, it takes a while to actually like go there to love someone through stages.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning, mostly it's just like you fall in love with your projection of someone. And then basically like at some point later down the line, they don't live up to your imaginary unexpressed expectations. And then you resent them for it.
Which is not fair to them at all.
No, and that's not love either.
Mm-mm. It's lust.
Whatever it is what it is. And lust is certainly a part of it, you know? But you know, even like, I remember this is not what anybody probably wants to hear, but, you know, I was on like dating apps and stuff like that. Not apps. I was on one dating app. I was on Rica. And I would get all these matches and I would just like look at them like baseball cards. Like I never even went out with anybody. I never went out with one person that I matched with. I would just be like, look at all my matches. You know, it's embarrassing now. I think back, you know.
But that's validating ego.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So that's a part of what it is rather than just going, hey, how you doing? What's going on with you? This is who I am. This is where I am. Let's meet in the middle. And so I'm just saying that lesson, I think, has moved into lots of other areas of my life. My area with my audience, my area with my business, my area with my friendships, you know?
Yeah, I could relate a little bit because I met Z on Bumble.
Yeah, cool.
So that was the only app I was ever on also. And I matched a whole bunch of people too.
Right.
I didn't look at them as baseball cards, but I'm like, okay, this is cool. There's interest.
Yeah.
But do you know the common question that I was getting asked?
No.
How tall are you? And I would reply with, I'm tall enough. Trust me, I'm tall enough. And they're like, no, I need to know. And then we would go on these superficial rants and things like, wow, is this what's really out there?
Yeah.
And this is what's happening. And then I have friends that are always single. I'm like, are they asking these questions? Is this why they're single?
Yeah.
And I start looking at these things. And then with Z, we asked the question and she's like, you know, I'm just on here. My friend put me on. I'm like, oh, my friend put me on too.
Right.
And then she's like, you know, I took the last year off of dating. That was it. And then I replied with, what were the greatest lessons you learned in the last year? She replied back with a diary.
Cool.
And that was it. And then she's like, we should probably take this off to coffee. And that was the difference between all the other people. And if I only wanted to get laid or whatever, I could have been like, yo, I'm 6 foot. Here's a shirtless photo.
Right.
But that wasn't the point. I always thought that was something. But now she has definitely guided me in a whole new light. She's the muse behind all this too. She's a catalyst. Man. So there's a few catalysts in my life, but knowing that you have a partner to back you up, she met me in finance and she's like, just start doing this. And when I used to write poetry, I would write it and then I would tell her in bed. And she's like, hey, I'd collect this guy named R.M. Drake. You probably know him.
Yeah.
He's like, I got all his books. You should put a book together. So I made an Instagram account. It was under Ben. That was my pseudo poetry name. And I started putting it out there. But I had a lot of things in my head like, well, I'm an artist. How can I now be a poet? Or how can I now be this? And then some of them started becoming spoken word. And we've talked about this before too. And then in my head, I'm thinking, am I stepping on your toes? Am I stepping on other poets' toes? Because now I'm going into this space, but like I'm this artist too? Or can we be the eternal creator?
The second one.
Because I would love for you to come paint a mural with me and start doing that as well, you know?
Yeah, I mean, God, that's a very kind offer. I am literally horrible at visual arts. But I did a stupid painting in Costa Rica recently, and even stupid is stupid. To put judgment on it like that is stupid. I'm just saying nobody's going to frame it, including me, but it was a great process.
Yeah.
I was actually like thinking about something that was important to me. Mm-hmm. And then I tried to create the representation of it. And maybe, you know, the actual painting was not something that I was proud of, right? But the process was something I was proud of. I really enjoyed it. And I still think it moved energy, which is the purpose of all art. I think when people get in their own way, often when it comes to a genre of art, it has to do with thinking that it has to be great or they have to be a professional or something like that. And that's boring, dude.
Yeah.
It's so boring. Just express yourself and play and, you know, discover something new through a piece of art that you might have never done before. So
if you don't mind, can we take our listeners on a little bit of journey? I know that you do these poetry workshops, and I'm sure you do a lot of corporate stuff.
I do, yeah.
And I used to work in that space, and I've done stuff with corporate people in art. Most of them are stuck in these boxes. They're pretty rigid. Whether they're executives or whatever level they're at. What are the triggers that you help people open up and start expressing themselves? Because one of the things that a lot of people say is like, I'm not creative. I can't do that.
Right.
And I'm like, did you make your breakfast today? What'd you put in it? That's creativity right there. How'd you get dressed? That's creativity right there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think people just need a safe environment to explore things in. When I do the workshops, whether they're corporate workshops or public workshops, or, you know, I've done prisons, I've gone to juvenile facilities. I had a program when I started that was in downtown LA called Art Share. And it was just me working with mostly kids from that community or East LA. And they would come in every week and we would just create poetry together and then share it. And then I started doing Upward Bound, which was like kids who were going to college for the first time in their family. And I did that for a few years in Whittier. And I just kind of like tripped into this program by accident. And then ultimately I realized that it's not confined to kids. It's a human thing. And everybody just needs access to being empowered by telling their story in a new way. And it's interesting because when you don't think you're great at something, it can be a Trojan horse for transformation in a way that something you're familiar with can't. So when you're writing poems and you're not a poet, you become a student again. And then this channel kind of opens up and all of these things can flow out that can be really empowering and surprising. So now I get to do that for groups of people many, many times a year. And it's one of the most gratifying things that I do. And I don't really do much other than provide the platform, ask them to be vulnerable from a place of strength, and then lead by example. Because if I'm asking them to be vulnerable and I'm not vulnerable first, then, you know, I mean, I'm not doing my job. Yeah. It's almost irresponsible, actually. Yeah.
So a question that I'd like to ask that I'm like, this might be a question when I ask them is, what's the difference between poetry and hip hop or rap? And a follow-up to that is, I don't know if you see this, but I've heard you talk about different things. Why is one held up at a different level than the other?
Well, I think music is the universal language, and it transcends everything. And so I'm happy that it's the biggest thing in the world. I mean, hip hop, it was so important to my life. It really came to me at a time that allowed me to tell unexpressed, you know, thoughts and to move emotions that I had no other outlet for.
Mm-hmm.
And freestyling to me was so amazing. It was just such freedom. Like, I just remember I would just do it for hours, man, you know, in ciphers by myself and battles. And it was just so immediate. And I really found my voice. I mean, I think, you know, based on a lot of different things that I won't get into, you know, just being able to stand up and, you know, speak something into the world with passion and with purpose was not something that I was used to. And so that was my first entrance into doing that. And then I just wound up in an open mic for poets in LA called the Poetry Lounge, which is still up and running. It's one of the biggest open mics in the country. And I started doing my rapping a cappella, and people kind of responded. And eventually I became more of a poet than an MC. But for many years, I was still trying to get signed.
There you go. Okay.
So it was a real part of my foundation at that point, everything I've built since. And it's still like, you know, hip hop is a cellular part of who I am. I think that in terms of why spoken word maybe hasn't reached the masses the way that it can, I think that it just hasn't had its moment. I mean, I was on HBO's Def Poetry Jam, and that was such an incredible show for poets, but there was no social media at the time. If there was, I think that a lot of those poets would have, you know, really, really blown up. And now you have the access to your audience without the middle person, even though the tech giants are centralized. At least you can communicate, you know,
the
with your
opportunity
audience.
is there.
Yes, exactly. So, so that's exciting, and I really think that the genre is going to continue to fly in new directions in the next, you know, years, and I'm just happy to be a part of that wave.
So I saw you light up when you were talking about hip hop and that time of life. It was just all over your face.
Yeah.
I look at you as a leader in the space. What if you restart Def Poetry Jam or start is that something that's maybe in your head to start a network or a show or a concert series?
Yeah, we've definitely thought about it. I mean, the only thing that I'll say about Def Poetry in terms of a format was that it was limited for each poet, because the poet got up and did their poem, and if the audience responded to the poem, then the poem kind of became the star rather than the poet. So I think you need a little bit more time. So what I'd love to do at a certain point is, you know, get the 15 best poets in the world, 8 best poets in the world at this. I mean, that's actually not a real thing. Best is not a real thing, but you know, you take one group of really great poets and allow them to have their own, you know, half an hour specials so that they can communicate with the audience, so that if somebody leaves that place, the poet is the star. And I think, you know, if you could break poetry and popular culture in a real way, one person is an anomaly, but, you know, more than one person kind of becomes a movement. And I would love to see this art form, you know, on equal status in every way in the world.
You could probably bring that to life with Netflix.
Holler at me.
Give them a call. So can we put you on the spot?
Sure.
What if I asked you to freestyle about Live Through Love?
I won't do that.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Because I'm so used to battling. This is just true. That like when I freestyle now, I go back to a part of myself.
Fair.
It just, those are the concepts and the words that show up. It's like bragging and like dissing other, literally it's in me.
Like Rabbit and 8 Mile.
Yeah. Well, whatever it is what it is.
Yeah.
And I did it so many times, and it was just, you know, a part of that, you know, time in my life. And then the second reason is because when I'm making poems, every word is so important to me. You know, when you're freestyling, you're just like having this like insane connection to the universe, and you can only focus on the next rhyme and the next line, which is almost like meditation. or like you think about like, why do young men like fight after they go to clubs? It's because they didn't hook up, and fighting is the next thing that brings them into the moment, because you can't think about anything else when somebody's throwing a punch at you. Mm-hmm. Freestyling is kind of like that. You can't think about anything else. And it brings you into that state kind of that you were talking about with your son, which is just moment.
Yeah.
There's nothing but this moment. Curiosity, wherever you go. So, but when I sit down to write now, I want to describe this concept. Mm. And this concept is more important to me than my momentary, fluttering.
So there you go. I think it's fair. That's fair. So to this day, out of all your poems, what is your ultimate favorite one? And I know that's probably a really hard question.
Well, it's the next one.
That's how I answer it.
Yeah. Because it's the one that's closest to source.
Now, is there a new one that you've recently worked on that you haven't or maybe have shared?
I have a bunch of them. You want to hear some poems?
I would love to.
Okay, cool. Okay, so this is one that I just wrote, and it's about my relationship with fear. Mm. And I think it's kind of an interesting poem, especially for now, because people have real and irrational fears.
Very much.
Right now. And they're even using the excuse of their real fears to stop them from living their lives. Mm. So this is like a reminder to myself. You're more likely to be killed while driving to the beach than by a shark. In fact, you're 30 times more likely to be killed by coconuts or falling airplane parts, and Google says that's just the start. Beware of bear attacks, fireworks, train tracks, bees, eating, drinking, sleeping, sex, ladders, subways, dogs, steps. All of these can cause your death. I'm surprised there's people left. Biking, boating, cancer, smoke, lightning, striking, hunting, stroke. Hippos are no fucking joke, and chicken wings can make you choke, or slipping on a bar of soap. Anything can make you croak. Lawn mowers, trees, guns, snow, wind, rain, sun. Many drown or die of thirst. Selfies are the fucking worst. Falling backwards off a cliff for likes that you will never get. Fire, ice, poison, snakes, rivers, valleys, deserts, lakes, knives, ties, all types of sports. They've weaponized our fucking forks. Cows, wheat, sugar, pork, obesity of every sort. Which brings me back to shark attacks. Statistically, they come up short. You're much more likely to be killed by popping out a champagne cork. That shouldn't stop your celebration. Put your glasses in the air. How about we toast to life and overcoming irrational fear? Now that's a cheers. I'm not pretending that there aren't threats, but we can't live our lives if we're this preoccupied with death. You cannot hide somewhere where time doesn't find you. Anywhere you go, it will be one step behind you to remind you. The you are will not be here forever. We're just spinning on a rock inside the universe together. It's a treasure. So let's measure life by more than just our years. It's the memories we make, especially when we are scared. It's the boundaries that we break and the risks we choose to take. It's the grace in our mistakes when we're humbled by a wave, when it tumbles us and pulls us under to an early grave, but we fight to reach the light just to live another day, and our fingers touch the surface and our lungs can breathe again, and we look off in the distance and we think we see a fin. We should probably get moving, make our way to solid land. We should get out of the water, but not never swim again.
Mm. Wow. I got a little bit of chills. There's times when I hear you speak, and it really comes down to your voice. I think your voice is so melodic. It's so calming.
Thanks, man.
I think it'd be a beautiful thing for a meditative app. Maybe that's another joke, another job or something. But I get chills whenever I hear you perform and whenever I hear you speak. and just having a regular conversation. So I
Thanks,
just want to thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure watching you grow. I'm so happy that you have a best friend now. It's going to take you into another space. And I'm excited to see where that goes.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you for having me.